or who they were working with, and then they'd kill them. And the people involved in this were a narco trafficker called Santillan, as well as an entire unit of the Juarez State Police Department, and an informant for the U.S. government who participated in the murders, arranged the house to bring the people in, and actually was in charge of making sure the bodies got buried. And over the course of, from August 2003 to mid-January 2004, about a dozen people were tortured and murdered in this way,
so he was
with the participation of the informant who was working for the U.S. government and relaying all this information back to his handlers, who were federal agents and federal prosecutors in the United States, and they were allowing these murders to continue. And that's part of it. That all came to a crashing halt when Santillan and his group of Mexican cops pulled over a DEA agent and his family in Juarez, and were going to whack them. They thought they had gotten information from one of their torture sessions that the agent was a competing smuggler, obviously mistaken. They didn't know that, and they pulled him over in Juarez and were going to bring him back to the house to kill him. And at that point, the informant and the agents involved on the U.S. side, because they're all wired up and in communications with each other, had to put a stop to it. And that's how this whole thing surfaced. And that's essentially the house of death. And then what happened after that is a DEA agent blew the whistle on all this, because these were his men. And instead of investigating the fact that the federal agents and U.S. government were complicit in mass murder, they went after the whistleblower, the guy who tried to bring this forward. And this went all the way up. These approvals for this informant to continue his operations, knowing he was committing murders, actually went all the way to the top of the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security here. And that is essentially the scandal of the House of Death. And to this day, nobody wants to touch it. The Mexican government's up to its eyeballs in it. According to the informant, the Mexican government's part of the drug trade down there, and obviously, in the case of Juarez, the Mexican State Police, there was an entire night shift, the entire Juarez Police Department was working for the narco traffickers and murdering people. And that's not coincidental. That's also the places where all these femicides have occurred, that there's been a rash of murders of women, and some people have tried to connect the two. And there's some indications that might be legitimate. But, so it's just a very violent culture. But what makes it particularly difficult in this case is supposedly the great, crusaders against the drug trade, which is, U.S. law enforcement, were actually contributing and participating in, the death and mayhem in order to make a case. And once, in other words, to make statistics and so that they can advance their careers, because the drug war is all about ultimately money and power, and whether you're for or against it, whichever side you're fighting on, you've got a vested interest either in the prison industry or in your career as a law enforcer, or on the other side making money off the deals you're doing. That's not everyone. I mean, there are some honest people. That's why this came out, but it is a corrupting factor that's replete throughout the nature of the drug war in the United States. And this case is not really all that unique. What's unique about it is we know about it. And the other thing you asked about was the Kent memo and the Bogota connection.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's essentially a similar scenario transplanted to Bogota, where DEA has a field office in Bogota. They have operations throughout Central and South America in cooperation with the governments down there. And in Colombia, as you know, Plan Colombia, there's a big U.S. presence ostensibly against the drug war. Well, in this case, Thomas Kent, the Kent memo, he was an attorney who worked for the Department of Justice, who worked on a wiretap unit. In the course of working his cases and in working with some other federal agents, he came across this trail of evidence indicating that DEA agents, as well as potentially other law enforcers, there's other for example, Customs or Homeland Security has operations there and so forth. But anyway, that a number of them had been corrupted in Bogota by the narco traffickers, the North Valley Cartel in particular, and we're working for them, essentially leaking them information about informants so they could kill the informants, telling them about investigations, and telling them in advance about fumigation, airplane lifts so they could, be prepared for those. And Kent wrote this internal memo indicating he had, run across these examples of this. That got leaked to us. That's how it got surfaced. But basically, they shut it down internally and covered it up. And he's, been ordered to shut his mouth. But the document's out there. And in fact, in the House of Death case and in the Bogota Connection case, where there's a group of corrupt U.S. law enforcers involved in the drug trade, this isn't just our word for it or people saying it anonymously. I mean, if you go to the narco news site, you'll find the actual government, U.S. government documents that spell all this out. But the thing is, once the truth is out, and you'll see this over and over and over again, if you repeat a lie enough and ignore the truth enough, the lie becomes the truth. Yes. And in these two cases, that's really it. And where they intersect is obviously in Colombia, the major crop is coca, and that's cocaine, and that has to be distributed. And in fact, the informant for the House of Death, the U.S. government informant who was involved with the House of Death, was actually a former federal Mexican cop who moved into the narco trafficking world and was coordinating shipments between Colombia and Mexico. And he claims, in conjunction with the Mexican military, in other words, these shipments were coming through with the knowledge and assistance of, the Mexican government. And that's where we start to get into the bigger picture, because, you have intelligence agencies as well who are, not just the United States, but across the world. If you have a government of any size, you have intelligence operations. And I've run across this before, too, where the black market, the narco trafficking world, is a penetration point for these intelligence agencies, because a lot of this, the drug war, the drug world, the illegal drug trade, in many cases is propping up entire governments, but it's clearly a big pipeline within the global pipeline.
And all sides are working together, it seems.
Well, the goal of these intelligence agencies is slightly different. I mean, they just want to get access to policy. And so what they do is cultivate assets. And if they're using this as a way into these areas to cultivate information assets, they don't really have an incentive in shutting it down either, because then they shut down their access to information. So I don't think it's a grand conspiracy. It's just it's kind of the way the world works. And unfortunately, it's all tied together in this particular case to the fact that the drug trade is a ubiquitous global national market that is coincidentally very capitalistic. It's an extreme form of capitalism, but it happens to be illegal, which makes it have a different dynamic than, let's say, selling automobiles.
There's a lot of speech from the international organizations, United Nations, for instance, that there's been a lot of changes in shifts of power among the cartels in South America, that inside of Mexico, and that Mexico today is transporting and smuggling and even producing most of cocaine into the United States, while Colombia, Venezuela and other countries of South America are dealing mostly with Europe in the recent months. What's your opinion upon that?
Well, I don't. My opinion on that is that the coca plant, which is what is a precursor for cocaine, is a South American crop, and what's happened in Mexico is this has evolved over the years.